Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice. There aren't many school-related memories that can compete with the feeling of walking into Pizza Hut and knowing, without question, that you were about to get what you had earned. Not through a test score or a report card that would be mailed home weeks later, but through something far more immediate. You read, you met the goal, and now you were cashing it in. For a kid who already loved books growing up in the 1980s and 90s, that moment didn't just reinforce the habit. It elevated it. Reading wasn't just something you were supposed to do, it was something that led somewhere. And that was the genius of Book It. And I think it's worth revisiting not just because the program is nostalgic, but because it was intentionally designed at a time when the country was already concerned about literacy and student engagement. When Pizza Hut launched the program in 1984, it wasn't a random marketing idea. It was a response to a broader national conversation about reading levels and academic performance. Schools were looking for ways to get students to read more consistently, and here was a private company stepping in with a simple proposition. We'll make it fun, we'll make it rewarding, and we'll meet students where they are. And for millions of young people, it worked. Now, more than 4 decades after its launch, Book It is making a high-profile return this summer at a moment when conversations around reading engagement feel especially urgent again. Pizza Hut has leaned back into the program not simply as a nostalgia play for millennial parents who remember earning those personal pan pizzas as children, but as part of a renewed emphasis on encouraging reading among younger students. And the timing feels notable. Schools across the country continue to wrestle with reading comprehension challenges that accelerated during and after the pandemic, while educators and parents alike are still trying to compete with an environment increasingly dominated by screens, short-form content, and fragmented attention spans. In many ways, the same core challenge that existed in 1984 remains in front of us today. How do you make reading feel compelling enough for students to choose it over countless other distractions? Students now are navigating a world filled with constant digital stimulation, short-form video, instant feedback, endless scrolling. And so reading, by comparison, asks for sustained attention. It requires patience. It doesn't always offer immediate payoff. So when educators and policymakers express concern about reading comprehension or declining engagement, they're often responding to a very real shift in how students experience information and attention. And that's where looking back at Book It becomes more than a nostalgic exercise. It becomes a reminder that motivation doesn't happen by accident. It's shaped by how experiences are designed. Now, one of the things Book It did so well was introduce just enough novelty to make reading feel different. Not entirely different. It didn't try to disguise reading as something else, but different enough to break through routine. Now, there was something about the chart on the wall, the progress being tracked, the small but visible markers of accomplishment. It gave reading a sense of momentum. You weren't just finishing books in isolation, you were moving toward something. And then there was the reward itself. A personal pan pizza might seem simple, but for a kid it felt significant. It was tangible, it was immediate. You didn't have to wait for the end of the semester or the end of the year. You could connect the dots between effort and outcome in a way that made sense. But the real impact wasn't just the pizza, it was the association that formed around reading. It became tied to something positive, something celebratory. And for students who may not have started out as avid readers, that association could be the difference between avoiding books and giving them a chance. And for those of us who already loved reading, it added another layer. It affirmed something we were already doing and gave it a sense of recognition. It said, in a pretty straightforward way, this matters. And sometimes, especially for young learners, that kind of affirmation carries more weight than we might expect. There's also something to be said about how approachable the entire experience was. The expectations were clear, the path forward was visible. There wasn't a lot of guesswork involved. And that kind of clarity can make a meaningful difference, especially for students who might otherwise feel overwhelmed or unsure of where to begin. In today's classrooms, where students are balancing multiple demands and navigate a range of expectations, that kind of clarity is often harder to come by. And when things feel unclear, motivation can drop off quickly. Students hesitate, they disengage, not because they don't care, but because they don't see the clear path forward. And so what Book It offers is a reminder that engagement often begins with making the first step feel manageable and worthwhile. It also highlights the role of joy in learning, something that we can easily overlook in more serious conversations about standards, outcomes, and accountability. Joy doesn't mean lowering expectations. It doesn't mean turning everything into a game or entertainment, but it does mean recognizing that when students feel good about what they're doing, they're more likely to keep doing it. And that's where novelty does play an important role. Not constant novelty, not distraction for its own sake, but thoughtful moments that break the pattern and invite students in. A new way of tracking progress, a different kind of recognition, an experience that feels just a little bit out of the ordinary. Because when something feels different, it captures attention, and attention is often the first step toward engagement. I think there's also a broader lesson here about how learning connects to life beyond the classroom. Book It didn't end with a checkmark on the list. It extended into a real-world experience. You went to the restaurant, you sat down, maybe your family joined you. It turned accomplishment into something shared, something memorable. And that kind of extension matters too. It reinforces the idea that what students are doing in school has relevance beyond the classroom. It gives learning a sense of place, a sense of presence. And so looking at where we are now with ongoing concerns about reading proficiency and the growing influence of screens on attention, it's worth asking how we can reintroduce some of these elements in ways that feel authentic. Not as a replica of Book It, but as an inspiration. Where can we bring a sense of novelty into the work students are already doing? Where can we make progress more visible and more immediate? And where can we create moments that students look forward to, not just assignments they need to complete? For me, thinking back on those early reading experiences, it's clear that the pizza was never the whole story. But it was the spark. It was the moment that made something familiar feel exciting, and for a kid, again, who already loved reading, it reinforced that habit in a way that felt personal and rewarding. For others, it may have been the entry point, the thing that made reading feel accessible, even enjoyable for the first time. But either way, it worked because it understood something simple and important. Motivation often begins with a reason to start, and sometimes that reason can be as straightforward and effective as a small pizza. A Slice with Dice is a production of Alderdice. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.